everybody, it's Jameson again, and it's time for another paint and ramble. And I'm going to be working on my Tyranids, which seem to be endless, but here we go. So, nothing new around here. Work is starting to pick up again, and unfortunately, it's leaving me less time do things that I want to do. Last year, now usually January, February, March, April is kind of a slower time where I work, and more so in January, February, and beginning of March. And last year, 2016, my mother-in-law fell and broke. She didn't break, but she fractured her leg. And so they didn't put it in a cast, but they wrapped it. And so it limited her mobility and ability to do things. And so pretty much every night, my wife and I had to go over there at night to help her rewrap the leg and do anything around the house needed to be done. And, get her set up for the night, because she was sleeping in a chair, recliner. So we'd put anything near the chair that she would need to try to, so that she would move as little as possible. And, she fell towards the end of December of 2015, and then this was all through January, February, and March. And because of that, I would get off work. It would be slower, so I would get off work anywhere from like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And then I'd come home and I'd work on some stuff. And then my wife would get off work at 5, and we'd have to run over there. And, we'd be over there an hour or two sometimes. And it got really frustrating because I felt like I couldn't really devote any time to anything, because I would get home and I'd have an hour or two to work on something or to kind of unwind, and then I'd have to go back out and do some stuff, take care of all that. And so I was doing it to help out, and because they needed the help. But it was frustrating. I didn't voice it to my wife because I didn't want to come off like an asswipe. But it was very frustrating that here during my slower season, when I would get time to myself more, do more other things, I didn't really get it too much. So I didn't say anything. So I looked forward to this year. So this year, our slower season finally rolled around. It seemed like May came around last year, and we started putting in these long hours, and it was pretty much 10, 11, 12-hour days all summer long, all fall long, all the way up until December, when it finally started to slow down a little bit. And unfortunately, the last few months here, since the beginning of the year, really hasn't been that slow. They took one of the drivers in our group, and they would rotate him in with another area of the company that needed help. So instead of there being 4 of us that did a particular thing, there would only be 3 of us, which meant 3 of us had to cover what 4 would usually do. So this year hasn't really had much slow time either. Now, there hasn't been any relatives that needed to be taken care of this year like last year, but it seems like I haven't been getting home as early. It's like I don't get home until 4:30 or 5, and like I said, the wife gets off at 5, and she doesn't work that far away, so she's home relatively fast. And so 5 o'clock rolls around, it's time to feed the dogs, it's time to get dinner going, get cleaned up after dinner, and all that kind of stuff. And any painting I want to do or anything else I want to do is pretty much takes place after 8. And so that's one reason why these Tyranids have taken so long. I really thought I was going to have a little bit more time to work on them, but unfortunately not. And now, here it is, the middle of March, and it's planting season. And a lot of the farms that farming companies that we service, they're out now getting their fields prepared for planting season coming up here soon. So it's getting busier and I've been putting in longer days again, and it's kind of, I've resigned myself to the fact that I really didn't get a slow season this year either, which again was, a little frustrating. It's nice having the money because I'm working, but when you can't really don't really have the time to enjoy it too much, sometimes I feel like what's the point? But it will allow me to afford a few extra models down the line, I guess. And then my wife, she's changing jobs. She's been where she's at for 17 plus years, and she's leaving because, long story short, the company's brought in some new owners, and things are changing there. It's not a very large company to begin with, and they told her some different stories about what she would do to qualify for a raise, and when she did that, they still didn't want to give her the raise, and so she's leaving. So she'll be starting a new job at the very end of this month, and she'll be making more money, so that'll be good. She'll have more money to spend towards her hobbies and her desire to get the backyard landscaped and done up, because all we have in the backyard right now is just a patio, and we've been in this house for 13 years and we've never really done much with the backyard, and she keeps saying she wants the backyard, so I try not to remind her how much I spend on these models and Games Workshop and miniatures and paints, because then she starts to get a little mad that she doesn't have a backyard yet. But if she's making more money and whatnot, we can maybe get that backyard going soon. And I admit it would be nice to have a backyard to go sit in, but I'm not one for sitting outside too much. It's got to be pretty nice weather for me to sit out there. And I don't know, now with modern technology, where you can take your laptops and tablets outside and watch TV outside much easier than you could in the past, I might be more inclined to go out there and do something. I certainly wouldn't be trying to paint outside, because I need this stupid magnifying glass in order to really see, and I can't take that outside very well. It's one of the reasons why I don't paint too much when I go to Games Workshop. I have a little miniature set up with a magnifying glass I take that I can sit on the table there, but it's not the best, and I'm accustomed to this, and I'm not about to take this and try to mount it on the table down there. So usually when I go to Games Workshop, I take stuff to paint that I really don't need the magnifying glass too much for. Like I was painting the shell or the carapace on these guys, or things that were easier. But with these smaller details I'm doing now, I pretty much need to do these at home. So yeah, so I probably, if I'm sitting outside in the backyard, I'll probably just be reading or watching TV. But we'll see. That's, we don't have nothing out there yet. Just a patio. We don't have any kind of overhang to shield anybody from the summer heat. And around here, the summer heat can get up to 110 degrees Fahrenheit, which is pretty bad. So yeah, that's it. So that's about all new around here. Nothing big going on. So one thing the job actually allows me to do is read quite a bit. I know it sounds goofy that I can read on my job, and I drive a truck, but it actually allows me to read quite a bit, because I drive a fuel truck, and when we go to get loaded, sometimes the loading rack, there's a line, so I get in line and I pull my book out and I read while waiting in line. And then a lot of times when I'm delivering, it takes a while to make the delivery for it to pump off, or if you're doing a gravity drop. So I can get my book out and read for 20 minutes then, and I'm a fairly fast reader, so I can get through quite a bit. So I've been steadily moving through some books. Right now I'm reading the Harry Dresden series, the Dresden Files, from Jim Butcher, which I'm really enjoying. Anybody likes fantasy, kind of urban fantasy, They're pretty good. And Jim Butcher is really interesting to listen to if you're into writing or listening to authors talk. He's pretty charismatic in telling stories and things. There's a lot of things online on YouTube you can look up where he's had interviews or presentations or doing Q&A sessions at conventions. They're pretty entertaining and informative too if you're an aspiring writer like I am. Well, I'm not an aspiring writer. I am a writer. I've been published. I'm just not any great successful writer, so I'll rephrase that. But I was perusing my books, thinking what I might read after I finish all these Dresden File books that are currently out, and I saw the Wheel of Time books on my shelf. I'm not too sure if anybody's familiar with the Wheel of Time from Robert Jordan. It's an epic fantasy series, in the same style as like Lord of the Rings. And the first book was called The Eye of the World, and it came out in the early 90s, I think. I don't know, I'd have to look it up, but it's been a while. And I remember, back in that time period, early 90s, late 80s, I was in my late teens, early 20s. I remember, that's all I read at the time was fantasy books like that. Since then I've expanded my tastes a little bit, but I still enjoy epic fantasy. And at the time, I saw Eye of the World in the bookstore, and it was in a trade paperback format. So not a mass market paperback like this, but a bigger trade paperback like I don't know if you can see those up there, but So I bought the book, and at the time, I like reading series all at once. And so when there was a book would come out and it was the first in a series, my habit, and I still do this, is to wait until the entire series is out before reading it. Well, I looked at the book, and for some reason I couldn't see where it said it was the first book in a series or anything like that. So I thought, okay, well, I'll wait about a year, and if nothing, and there's no sequel coming out, I'll go ahead and read this book. So I put it on the shelf, and I read other stuff, and I waited, and I never saw a sequel come out. And about a year later, I thought, okay, I don't see anything coming out, so this must be a standalone book. So maybe I'll go ahead and read it. So I started reading the book, and I was really enjoying it, and I was quite a ways into the book when I just happened to flick past the last page and happened to see where it said, "This is the end of the first book of the Wheel of Time." I was like, "Oh shit! You mean there's going to be a sequel now?" Well, not long after that, I saw the sequel on the shelf. I was still reading the first book, and I saw the sequel come out. It was The Great Hunt. I was like, okay, well, I'll go ahead and get the sequel, and I'll read that. So I read the first two books back to back. I finished the first one, I bought the second one, and I started to read it. And I thought, incorrectly, but I thought maybe it was going to be a trilogy. And a lot of times books are series or trilogies, read books. I thought, well, I'll read these two, and it'll only be another year, and the last book will be out, and it shouldn't be too hard for me to remember what was going on. Well, somewhere around that time period, I don't know if anybody remembers the old Walden bookstores. I don't know if they're around anymore. There used to be quite a few out in this area, and they disappeared. I think they went away. Kind of could have gone the way of a lot of the other big booksellers. But it was either Walden Books or I think it was Walden Books. They had a little newsletter, actual newsletter that you could pick up in the store. It came out every month or couple months or something. It was kind of a little science fiction newsletter, and it would preview different books coming out, and they would have interviews with different authors. And I picked up one because the third book in the Wheel of Time was coming out. The Dragon Reborn was the name of that one. And it was coming out in hardcover. The first two come out in trade paperback, but this one was coming out in hardcover, and I bought the book, and at the same time they had this little thing that you could pick up free in the store, a little newsletter that you could pick up free in the store and learn more about the author and all that. So I picked that up and I was reading it, and I come to find out in the interview that this was going to be a 6-book series. I was like, oh boy. So I got the 3rd book and I started to read it, and it had been a year since I had read the first 2, and I was having trouble remembering where the last one had left off. I was remembering a lot of things, but a lot of the details had slipped my mind. And so I read like 30 or 40 pages in that book, and I put it aside, and I thought to myself, well, 6 books, I can't do this every year. Every year there's going to be a book, I'm going to pick it up, I'm going to read it, and I'm going to have trouble remembering where the series was at. Because I had done that before with a series from David Eddings that was 5 books, The Malorian, sequel series to The Belgariad. Every year when the book hardcover came out, I bought it and read it, and I had to remember where the series had left off. So I thought, I'm going to wait until all these books are out, and then I'm going to read them. I'll go back if I have to and reread the first 2 books, and then I'll read the remaining 4. So that was my plan. Now this was back in whatever, 92 or 3 or 4 or something like that. So a year went by and the next book came out, and 4th book, and I bought it and put it on the shelf. And around that time, in an interview, I saw Robert Jordan say that it was probably going to be 7 books in the series at this point. It was looking more like 7 books. So I was like, okay, whatever. So another year went by and the 5th book came out, and he says, no, it looks like it's going to be 8 books in the series. And I'm like, oh boy, alright, well, so I bought the current book and put it on the shelf with the others. And so a year went by, and the 6th book came out, and I didn't see anything. Another year went by or so, and the 7th book came out, and I thought, okay, only 1 more book to go. And it was around that time period I saw another interview with him where he said it was going to be 10 books. I was like, what happened to 9? Last I knew it was going to be 8, and now all of a sudden it's jumped to 10. So about this time, around the time another year or so went by, book 8 came out. He was getting longer and longer in between books. It was a year. Initially, it was a year between each book, and then it was getting to be like a year and a half because, as the series got longer and more complex, I guess it was taking him more time to write it. And it was a very successful series, and then he started to, somewhere in there, started to write a prequel series at the same time. So like 1 year, a book would come out in the main series, and then his plan was the following year to have one in the prequel series come out. And I was like, come on, finish the main series first. So, book 8, book 9, book 10 come out, and every time they'd come out, I bought them in hardcover and put them on the shelf because I wanted to have a complete set. But I didn't read them. And somewhere along the line there, I read where he was getting ill. And I thought, oh no, he's going to die and not finish the series. And by this point now, it's up to around the year 2006 or 7 or something like that now. About 10 years ago. And sure enough, he passed away from a rare blood disease of some kind. And there's a long story how his wife and editor, she was his editor, how she picked Brandon Sanderson to finish the series. You can look that up. I'm not going to go into that story. But he was a fan, and he wrote a tribute to Robert Jordan on his website, and someone called attention to that, and she read it, and then she read some of his work, and she offered him the job of finishing the series. And at this point there was 11 books out. Robert Jordan had finished the 11th book, and he swore the 12th was going to be the last one. Even if it was a huge book, it was going to be the last one because he knew he was dying and he was going to try to get it done. But he didn't make it, and I think he left copious notes, on the computer, written, and even I think dictated some recordings. And so Brandon Sanderson was chosen to finish it, and they decided to make it 3 books. So it ended up being book 12, 13, and 14 that he finished. And there are actual parts of those books that Robert Jordan wrote. And he always maintained from the beginning that he knew exactly how the series was going to end, and he could write the very last scene of the last book even before he even started the series. So I think he did that. He did that because the last scene in the last book I've heard is that he actually wrote it. But the point of this long story about this long book series that's taken all these years is that I can finally read this thing. I bought that first book back in 1990-ish, and it was around 93-ish, 2-3, that I decided to wait for the series to be complete before reading it. Well, that's been 23, 24, 25 years now that I've been buying the books and waiting and waiting and waiting. That's a long ass time when you think about it. That's enough time for someone to be born, go through school, go to college, get a degree, and get a job somewhere. So after I'm done with these Dresden File books, I might actually get to read those books. They're huge. They're big books. I mean, each book is big. And, I've read a lot of the comments. People have said how some of the books around 9 and 10 kind of bogged down and different things. So I kind of got to get myself mentally geared up to tackle something like that. And somehow there's a hair stuck to this model. I didn't notice it before, but apparently it was stuck to the model when it got primed. There we go. Got rid of that. Don't need hairy termagants. They're scary enough as it is. You don't need hair growing out of what would be their asses. So I can finally read those books now. And, oh, he's got another one. I didn't get it. So the sad thing is that I can finally read those books. I just haven't been in the frame of mind to tackle them. And one of these days I guess I will. I've waited and waited and waited and waited for the chance to read them, and now that I have the chance, it's not really something that I'm overly eager to do. I don't know why. The whole time I was like, ooh, this series looks so good, and I love epic fantasy stories. I have one in mind that I want to write myself one day. But, I don't know. I have to be in the proper frame of mind, I guess, to sit down and actually start that series after all these years. So that's my Wheel of Time ramble, babble, ramble, whatever you want to call it. I have no idea how long I've been talking, but I'm probably going to wrap this up because when I started it, it was getting closer to 5 o'clock. I got to feed the dogs here. They're laying in the floor, giving me that look because I don't know why or how, but they have these eerily accurate internal clocks, and when it gets near right around 5 o'clock, they start pacing the room because they know what time it is, and that's their way of saying you got to feed us. So I am going to go ahead and stop. I gotta get this paint watered down again. It's getting a little chunky. So if you've watched this far, I applaud you. Yeah, that's this ramble. Haven't had a lot of time to make videos in the last few weeks because of work, but I'm continuing my plans for my Tyranid forces. I got some ideas for some stuff which I will like to make a video about, but we'll see if I ever actually get the time. So until then, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.